March 4th, 1944, Berlin. The German capital woke beneath a grey, trembling sky. From a distance came a sound, faint at first, like wind scraping against iron. But to trained ears, it was unmistakable. Engines, hundreds of them. Inside the Luftwaffe command post, phones rang without pause. Messengers ran between officers' desks. Radar operators shouted coordinates. "Bomber formations approaching from the west," they cried. It wasn't the first time. Berlin had been bombed before. Its people had grown accustomed to sirens, to dust and debris, to the dull roar of anti-aircraft guns. But that morning, something felt different. On the runway at Tempelhof Airfield, German pilots sprinted to their fighters. Boots pounded against frozen concrete. The smell of fuel and oil filled the air. Mechanics shouted, pulling away wheel chocks. Engines screamed to life. Messerschmitts and Fokker-Wulfs clawing toward the sky. Oberleutnant Heinz Nova remembered it clearly years later. "We thought we knew what to expect. Bombers, hundreds of them, alone. No fighters could fly that far. That's what we believed. At 25,000 feet, the German pilots saw them, the silver dots, sunlight glinting off wings stretched in formation. B-17S, dozens, hundreds. But then, something else. Faster, smaller, sleeker. They weren't bombers. They were something else. Something that should not have been there." Heinz blinked, confused. He rubbed his goggles. But the shapes remained, darting, circling protectively around the bombers. And that's when he realised, with a chill down his spine, that the impossible had happened. There were American fighters over Berlin. The Luftwaffe pilots pulled higher, squinting against the cold light. Through the haze of exhaust and thin cloud, they saw them clearly now, sleek silver aircraft gliding above the bomber formations. "Impossible," someone whispered through the radio. "They can't be here, not over Berlin." For months, German intelligence had promised this couldn't happen. The Americans' fighters, they said, couldn't reach this far. The P-47 Thunderbolts, the P-38 Lightnings, too heavy, too thirsty for fuel. They'd turned back long before reaching the capital. But the planes the Germans were seeing now weren't Thunderbolts. They weren't Lightnings. They were Mustangs. Fast, graceful, relentless. And as they turned through the sky, sunlight flashing off their wings, the German pilots felt something they hadn't felt in years. Fear. From his cockpit, Oberleutnant Heinz Nova called into the radio. "Confirm identification. What are these escorts?" No one answered. Only static. Then another voice broke in, flat, disbelieving. "P-51s. They're P-51s. For a moment, silence filled the airwaves. Then, panic. Commanders on the ground demanded reports. Pilots shouted over one another. "They can't have the range," someone cried. "They can't be here." But they were. The Mustangs dove like hawks, their Merlin engines roaring as they tore through the thin air. The first tracers streaked across the sky, cutting through the grey clouds like lightning. In seconds, the familiar rhythm of battle, the planned interception of unescorted bombers, collapsed into chaos. German pilots found themselves fighting not lumbering bombers, but agile, high-speed predators. Heinz dove, trying to break through the swarm, the air filled with smoke trails and gunfire. He glanced left. His wingman was gone. Right. Another plane spiraled in flames toward the city below. "They moved like nothing I'd seen," he later said. "Every time I thought I had one, two more appeared behind me." Above them, the sky shimmered with contrails, hundreds of white scars marking the end of an illusion. The Luftwaffe had believed it could defend Berlin. That belief died that morning. The radio chatter fell into chaos. Command centres near Berlin couldn't believe the reports coming in. American fighters, over the capital, escorting bombers. It defied every calculation, every report, every page of German engineering logic. Inside a dimly lit operations bunker, officers stared at the flickering radar screens. The dots were still there, waves of bombers, and smaller dots moving fast around them. Too fast, too deep, too impossible. "These fighters cannot exist," one Luftwaffe analyst whispered. "And yet," replied his superior, "they are here." The impossible had become real. At 25,000 feet, Oberleutnant Nova fought to climb again. His aircraft shook as he pulled through thin air. He had barely seconds to think before another silver blur streaked past his canopy. He turned his head and saw the red-nosed plane, the markings of the American 4th Fighter Group, curving upward like a ghost rising through smoke. It's not possible, Noah thought. They should be out of fuel. They should be turning back. But they didn't turn back. They stayed. And as the dogfight raged over Berlin, the truth dawned across German command. These weren't the same American planes they'd faced before. The P-51 Mustang, powered by the British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, had changed the laws of aerial warfare. It could fly from England to Berlin and back again. It could fight longer, climb higher, and escort bombers across all of Germany. Inside the Reich Air Ministry, disbelief turned into silence, then dread, because in that moment they understood what it meant. There would be no more safe zones, no more unescorted bombers, no more opportunities to strike freely when the enemy turned back. The old strategy, the Luftwaffe's very foundation, had just crumbled in the air above Berlin. And the proof wasn't in a report or a theory, it was in the flames falling from the clouds, burning German aircraft crashing through the grey mist. Noah levelled his plane and caught a glimpse below, the city stretched out in muted light, distant sirens wailing. He whispered to himself, not into the radio this time, but into the dead silence of his cockpit. If they can reach Berlin, they can reach anywhere. It was not a realisation, it was a prophecy. By mid-March 1944, the skies above Germany had changed forever. What had once been the proud hunting ground of the Luftwaffe, a place where German aces carved legends in contrails, had turned into a trap. The hunters had become the hunted. Every mission began the same way now, the same sinking silence before takeoff, the same whispered prayers over engines coughing to life. They all knew, once they climbed high enough, the silver ghosts would be waiting, those red-nosed Mustangs, the ones that never seemed to run out of sky or bullets. At air bases across northern Germany, pilots looked up every morning and wondered if this day would be their last. Not because they lacked courage, but because courage no longer mattered. "They appear out of nowhere," said one pilot, trembling as he climbed into his cockpit. "You think you're safe, and then," he snapped his fingers, "they're behind you." The P-51s were not just machines, they were a presence. Every German pilot who survived a sortie carried their image burned into memory, a flash of silver wings, a glint of sunlight on a canopy, and the brief, hopeless second before the guns opened fire. The Reich's great defences, the radar nets, the interceptor squadrons, the coordination from Berlin, all began to break down. Every plan the Luftwaffe had built over 5 years suddenly meant nothing, because now the Americans didn't need to turn back halfway. They could fly to Berlin, Leipzig, even Munich, bomb their targets and return home, escorted every mile of the way. In a smoky command room, a colonel tore his headset from his ears. "They are everywhere," he shouted. "There's no line left to defend." Outside, the drone of engines never stopped. The air trembled with it, a deep mechanical heartbeat that echoed day and night. The once proud air defence of the Third Reich had been stretched thin and then shattered. German morale began to rot from within. The young pilots, barely trained, barely men, were sent up in haste, told to intercept impossible odds. Many never returned. Those who did came back with eyes that no longer looked human, eyes that had seen too much sky on fire. From below, Berlin's civilians watched as contrails crisscrossed high above, streaks of smoke etching the story of defeat across their own heavens. They didn't know it yet, but this was the day their skies changed forever. The day when the Luftwaffe stopped fighting for victory and started fighting just to survive. And far above it all, a single P-51 pilot glanced down at the chaos below and whispered into his radio, "They're done. The Eagles are falling." He was right, because from that moment on, Germany no longer owned the sky. It belonged to the red-nosed shadows. By April 1944, the sound of engines over Germany had changed. No longer the roar of confident Luftwaffe squadrons, but the distant hum of bombers, escorted by the unrelenting P-51 Mustangs, the new rulers of the European sky. Every German pilot who climbed into his cockpit now did so with one unspoken thought. This could be my last flight. The veterans, the men who had once terrorized Europe from the clouds, were gone, shot down, captured, or simply exhausted beyond measure. Their replacements were young, boys of 17, barely trained, eyes burning with fear and false courage. And across every airfield, an unshakable truth began to spread. The sky had turned against Germany. That morning, over Berlin, the first sunlight glimmered off the rooftops as sirens wailed. People in the streets looked up, again, always up. And there they saw it, the same silver light slicing through the clouds. Hundreds of them. Mustangs, gliding in perfect formation. For those on the ground, it was both terrifying and beautiful, like watching the sky itself being rewritten. The air defences opened fire, black clouds of flak bursting across the heavens. But it didn't matter anymore. The P-51s danced through it like ghosts, guiding the bomber stream safely to their targets. Inside the cockpits of the Luftwaffe's last remaining fighters, despair and disbelief collided. They tried to climb, to intercept, to do something, but the Mustangs were always there first. Above them, behind them, around them. They came from every direction, one German survivor later said. It felt like the sky had teeth. He wasn't wrong. That day and every day that followed, the Mustangs tore through the Reich's remaining air power. Factories were flattened, railways destroyed, airfields burned. The Luftwaffe, once the pride of the Reich, became a shadow. Even the German people could feel it. They no longer ran to shelters in panic. They walked, slowly, silently, as if they already knew resistance was useless. The distant hum above them wasn't just airplanes anymore, it were fate. By summer, when American bombers flew unchallenged across the heart of Germany, even the high command could no longer pretend. The Reich's message of invincibility was shattered. Every flight over Berlin was proof that the war had already been decided, not on the ground, not in speeches, but here, among the clouds. And in that endless blue battlefield, the P-51 Mustang had become more than an aircraft. It was a symbol of range, power, and inevitability, the machine that made the Luftwaffe obsolete. As one historian later wrote, when the P-51 appeared over Berlin, Germany didn't just lose the sky, it lost the war. In the fading light of that spring evening, a lone German pilot, his aircraft riddled with holes, fuel almost gone, looked out over the burning horizon of his homeland. The smoke, the silence, the sinking sun. He whispered to himself, almost as a confession, "We ruled the skies once, and now we're just falling stars." He throttled down, pulled off his goggles, and stared into the endless sky above. The same sky that once carried their pride, and now carried their defeat. The P-51s roared past him, victorious, untouchable, streaks of silver fire against the dying day. That was the moment the world changed. The day the Luftwaffe truly died. The day the sky itself turned against Germany.